Hey guys and gals, today is a shootout of what I think are the top 5 electric outboards in the 3 to 5 horsepower range from the 5 biggest companies doing it. We're going to be covering company background, performance, efficiency, weight, portability, aesthetics, quality, and most importantly, price. The motors in question are the Torqeedo Travel 1103 CS, the Elco EP-5 electric outboard, the E-Propulsion Spirit 1.0 Plus and Evo, the Newport Vessels NT300, and the Mercury Avatar 7.5e. Let's start off with Torqeedo, since it was the first to ever do it. Torqeedo has been the longest standing electric outboard company, period. They've been out since, I don't know, for decades now. And they've had tremendous success with their outboards. Their Travel 1103 CS 3 horsepower equivalent is probably their biggest and best selling motor, the one they're most known for, which is a successor to their previous Travel 1003 model. In their previous model, you could hear kind of a loud whining sound, but in their newer model, they have direct drive technology. Pretty much most of the new electric outboards have direct drive technology, which is in general much quieter. It's solar rechargeable, fairly lightweight, and the battery comes apart from the motor so you can carry both independently, so if weight's an issue for you, the motor's not a bad choice. But let's look at how it achieves its power, how it achieves to be a 3 horsepower equivalent. Say that the actual thrust is equal to like a 4 horsepower outboard, which is probably pretty believable because most electric outboards and just electric motors in general have a lot of torque. From the 2.5 to 6 horsepower, like gas-powered, like 4-stroke outboard range, you're just really not going to see a whole lot of difference in speed in those. So when it says it's comparable to a 3 horsepower motor in terms of propulsive power, it probably is. Very believable. When it says it's comparable in terms of actual thrust power to a 4 horsepower, I'd say that's probably very believable as well. So it's going to have enough pushing power, so if you get caught in waves or some wind, you're not just going to get stuck there. You'll see that. With like that 2.5 horsepower, you might not see any more actual speed from like a 6 horsepower, but where you notice that difference is when you're stuck in elements. Calm seas, you won't know any difference. So it's just when you're stuck in the wind and stuck in waves and your boat is just dragging and sagging and possibly even getting carried by the wind, that extra horsepower is when you actually see that difference. So nominal voltage is 29.6, final charge voltage is 33.6. So that is its own unique voltage. That can't be replicated by a third party. There's nobody I know that will make that type of battery. I've never seen another third party battery that meets those specifications. Those specifications are so like finite and unique to this motor that I guess even if Torqeedo wanted to have the option to run third party batteries, you can't. The fact that it runs at 33.6 volts, I don't think that was a smart move for them. It really does pigeonhole the customer into using only their proprietary battery, which again isn't terribly impressive considering the other proprietary batteries from some of the other companies are much more powerful. And its overall price of $2,948, and that's before taxes. It's not terrible. Is the motor probably worth that money? Yeah. But when you have people out there that can meet or exceed the performance levels of this motor at a cheaper cost, it's not really a good look to stay at that kind of cost. Overall, it's still a really nice motor from the longest standing company out there to do it. We're going to move on to the Elco. So Elco Motor Yachts, pretty big company. I think their bigger thing is electric inboards. They're really well known for that. And they're also known for a lot of their higher horsepower electric outboards. They have an EP20, EP30, and even an EP-50, which is a 50 horsepower equivalent. We've actually seen the performance of that one firsthand, and they have some pretty impressive stuff going on. You know, when I viewed electric only fishing tournaments, like the Elco EP-20 is like I think the most seen motor out there. But I've never seen anybody run their 5 horsepower motor. I've only known of like a handful of people who've ran it. I cannot personally attest to how this thing runs. I can only just tell you what I've seen from it, and what I see from it. It claims to generate a 5 horsepower equivalent in terms of thrust and power off of only 24 volts. So they're pretty big on using third-party batteries. I think that's like one of their biggest selling points is that you can use any sort of battery pack with them. They don't have any sort of digital readout on their motor. All the other motors out of the 5, this is the only one that doesn't have a digital readout. This one can just be used with an actual remote throttle or with a tiller throttle, but the tiller, it looks very much like a standard gas outboard. I think that's their thing. So in terms of style and quality and aesthetics, I like that. A lot of people may not like that, but I do like that they tried to replicate a gas outboard look. If you look at the EP-5, looks just like a 4 to 5 horsepower motor. That's what it would look like with a cowl, with a lower unit, everything. The other thing though is that I think this does actually have an impeller because the electric unit is in the actual cowl, just like the motor would be in the actual cowl. And so there are some cool things that come with that, and then there are some not great things that come with that. I think one of the not great things that come with that is like you actually have to maintenance this motor. It's not completely maintenance free. All the other motors, virtually maintenance free, truly. So there's that. No digital readouts. You can actually measure verbatim where your readout is, how much power you actually have, and that's something that is really prevalent in the new age electric outboards, and everybody finds that invaluable. I find that invaluable. So if they don't have that, not great. So you either have to have the electric batteries you're using to power the system probably need to be pretty high, 100 amp hour or better lithium batteries, because remember, it's achieving 5 horsepower equivalent with only 24 volts. That means it's probably drawing a lot of amps, so you couldn't run a 30 amp hour battery or even a 60, I think, and do well. You'd have to run 100 amp hour batteries just to power this thing to even generate that much. You'd have to run them in series, and it'd have to have BMSs. And you can monitor the BMS, and that's how you would monitor the actual battery's power, because there's no digital readout on the motor. That's how you have to do it. That, and I've been told they're loud. Never actually heard it. It's just what I've been told from the community of people that we talk to and people who've actually had this motor. It's even more than the Torqeedo. And in some ways, I mean, other than you can use third-party batteries with it, it doesn't offer more than the Torqeedo. It's actually, I don't know. I would actually really like to try one. I don't want to bash this performance. Like, I wonder how it runs. I mean, it's less batteries, it's less battery packs overall, 5 horsepower equivalent. But again, the 2.5 to 5 horsepower range, you're really not going to see any difference in speed. You would only see it in like thrusting ability. So I wonder how it does. The E-Propulsion Spirit 1.0. The E-Propulsion probably was the first true real competitor against Torqeedo. Torqeedo just had such a dominant run for so long. And there were a few people that tried and failed. And then there's always one company that eventually gets it right and sticks. And that definitely was E-Propulsion with their original Spirit 1.0. And then they now have a Plus and Evo option, which has direct drive. The motor is light. It is absolutely 100% the quietest on the market. And I know this personally, nothing beats it in terms of actual quietness. So if quietness is important to you, this one just very, very definitively and noticeably beats all the other four. It has breakaway technology in its prop. So if you hit rocks or you hit like something, the prop doesn't get destroyed. The lower unit doesn't get destroyed. It's actually pretty resilient, the whole lower unit. That's one thing that it has unique about it over all the others. Also, it has the ability to take either its proprietary battery or third-party batteries. So you can buy the motor at pretty much like $1,450 out the door, which isn't terrible. And then you can go get an extension cord, and then you can just go ahead and run that to a 48-volt setup. So they do make third-party 48-volt battery packs that'll push this motor. You can also run 4 12-volt battery packs in series to get pretty serious range. So out of all the 5, the E-Propulsion has the longest range at full throttle. Now, full throttle is, if we're going to be fair to all these, is not the best way to run the motor. Because you can achieve pretty much 80% of your boat's actual speed at about half the wattage. These are all like 1 kilowatt in general, plus or minus a little bit, seems to be the average of how they are generating a 3 horsepower equivalent. So, I mean, if you're running all those batteries in series, so you had a much bigger boat and you had the space to run all those batteries, then you could probably have some pretty serious range. The Evo is their remote steer, and they have Bluetooth, but most people will run the wired steering. It's just safer. Like, you don't want Bluetooth to fail, like when you're trying to pull your boat into a dock. So, and it also has an integrated tiller handle on it. So both the Evo controller and the tiller handle both have digital readouts. You can see just like Torqeedo. A little bit different layout in terms of how you read the power, but I like this digital readout because it's a little bit more accurate. When you're actually reading how it is, it gives you true actual performance in terms of how it's ran. Like, there'll be bars in a circle that are blinking, and if you adjust speed, then the readout adjusts. If you adjust the throttle down to lower watts, then it readjusts on the actual battery meter to give you your new range. Works. So this is actually the only motor out of all 4 that offers both a proprietary battery and the option for third-party batteries. It's the only one. All the other motors, either you use a third-party battery or you only use a proprietary battery. This is the only one that will do both, which I think is pretty excellent. That, and though their actual proprietary battery is very competitive, it is the only one like it. The battery floats in water. So if you were on your little dinghy, or your sailboat, or your John boat, whatever you're putting this on, you're trying to install the battery, you get hit by a wave, I don't know, something happens, you trip, the battery falls in the water, nobody cares. No big deal. You just go and retrieve it. Like, dry out the plug and plug it in. So you have a complete waterproof battery that floats. That's huge. On top of it, it's a 48-volt system. You get a 48-volt battery. The more volts you have, the less amps you have to draw. So it's very understandable that the motor is very efficient just by that. I've tested 3 out of these 5 motors. This one had the longest range. There are other videos of people testing E-Propulsion against Torqeedo. E-Propulsion completely destroyed the Torqeedo in overall range. And it's likely due specifically to the battery setup. They both have direct drive. They both have other things. But the 48-volt system with just a higher watt-hour percentage. 1,276 watt-hours versus 915. I mean, you do the math. It's math. It's going to beat it. In terms of actual max throttle, it doesn't win in overall max speed. But max throttle for all these outboards, if you run it, you can only run it for a matter of minutes, so you'll deplete the battery in pretty much all. This one actually has this one is not the fastest out of all of them, but you can run this one at max throttle the longest and get the longest range. At max throttle, it does get beat by the other motors, but it's only like 0.3 to 0.5 miles an hour, which is not incredible range, considering if you ran all the other ones at max throttle, they would die off much faster. So this one would still end up winning in terms of range at max throttle versus the others. The whole motor can be turned in a 360. Clamp-on system's easy. The trim pin system's pretty easy. It's just a nice motor. It's got carrying cases. It's got all these other things going for it. It's the most complete. It delivers really well. If you bought the motor in the proprietary battery pack, it comes right at around $2,500. And it also, like the Torqeedo, can be ran on solar. The E-Propulsion's motor was actually so dominant over the other two that it kind of just ran the market for a very long time as it is. But there's people that are hungry. They want part of this market too. They came in. Mercury, let's talk about companies here. Torqeedo's company, pretty nice, long-standing. E-Propulsion, also a fairly good company, pretty solid. But like Mercury Marine is Mercury Marine. Mercury does insane things that none of these other companies have done. But the whole point is, if there's anybody that's new that's going to come into this market and make a statement, it's going to be Mercury. And they did that with their Avatar 7.5E. And I think the 7.5E is 750 watt output at the prop. I don't exactly know what the actual wattage output at the prop is for the other ones. What I can say is I did test this motor specifically, and I do like it a lot. So let's talk about quality. Aesthetics, clearly it's the nicest looking motor out of all 5. It completely destroys all the other motors in terms of aesthetics. Look at it. Look at it. Beautiful. Clearly some engineering went into that. Most of Mercury's motors look fantastic. They have this cowling design. So I'm glad they brought that same cowling design and brought it down to their electric outboard. And I have one of their 20 horsepower Gen 4 Mercs, and the tiller is very much like that. Obviously, they don't have like the throttle shifting is not the same because obviously you shift forward and reverse very much like a trolling motor on this. You don't actually need a throttle shifter to shift linkage in the lower unit. It's not like that. The whole motor is actually in the lower unit. You can see it right there. And everything in that cowl is actually battery housing. The digital readout is the best looking digital readout out of all of them. By far, pretty much everything out of the box in terms of looks and aesthetics, Mercury by far just destroys everybody. So how does it perform? I mean, by the looks of it, you think it'll take over the world. But is it quieter? Is it faster? Is it more efficient? So in terms of quietness, it's not the loudest, but it's definitely not the quietest. In terms of actual thrusting power, I would say it's probably very, very close to a 5 or 6 horsepower in terms of actual thrusting power. But overall speed, it's not going to beat any of the other 5. When I did a max speed test on my boat with this motor versus the other 3, we're talking about a 0.1 to 0.3 mile an hour difference against the other 2. And that just isn't enough to really sell me home on this. Specifically since at wide open throttle, the range on this one, though it is not the worst range at wide open throttle, is not the best range. So here's where you kind of get it. They did really well, all the way until the time when it actually came to performance. The only thing that really stands out notably in performance is actual thrusting power out of the hull. It has very good thrusting power out of the hull, but that's it. Max range, it loses. In quietness, it loses. Portability, it's heavier and bulkier overall. Maybe a lot heavier than the other ones we've talked about. So it loses. And in terms of battery, you can only use its proprietary battery inside the cowl. They did not make an option for third-party batteries, and I think that Mercury is a tremendous fail. Like, you should have had focus groups or something. Why you would just... It's like you failed on the things that really, truly mattered. Like, you can't go any faster. We'll give it to you, right? At 3 horsepower is 3 horsepower. Like, there's just only so much speed you can get from any motor in that horsepower class. Fine, right? But what about the efficiency range? I mean, you were beating them in everything else. You should have just made a 13 or a 1400 watt hour battery and shoved it in there, and you might have gotten better range overall. Then you would have at least had range to brag about. But you can't brag about weight and portability. It's It's the least portable out of all 5. I don't know.
That ad of this being light is a big myth.
I think you just took the biggest L in not allowing the option for third-party batteries. Your internal battery is expensive. You have to get like 2 of those if you want an extended range. You can only use those. I just think that was just not a good win. Clearly a lot of intelligence went in here, but like whoever had power over the final design failed. So if Mercury, you put out like a 7.6E or later, you got to run third party. And also the thing that really kills it is the price. So you don't get any more real performance, and you get more weight, and you have to deal with only proprietary battery for about $1,000 more than like the E-Propulsion. E-Propulsion with their proprietary battery and outboard setup is at $2,500. This one's at $3,500. It's only $400 to $500 more than the Torqeedo and the Elco, but it's still like that much more money. But it also does, I think, beat the Torqeedo and the Elco like very, very definitively. In terms of like all of these, I would say this is still a really, really good motor. It's a 48 volt motor. The 48 volt motors just run better. They run cooler, they run quieter. They need less to compensate more because they have that baggage of the voltage. And coming out, probably the newest one to come out. I don't know which one came out before. Like I tried to rank them from oldest to newest. Obviously Torqeedo was starting it, so we started with them. Then Elco was after Torqeedo, and then E-Propulsion came after Elco. And I think Mercury came before the Newport, or vice versa, but there are the 2 newest ones. The Mercury Avatar and the Newport Vessels NT300 came out to compete directly against the other 3. So this was what they came out with, the NT300. So Newport, in terms of a company, kind of known for making like third-party trolling motors to compete directly with, I know, Minn Kota and Motor Guide. I've never actually had one of their trolling motors, can't comment on their quality, but I mean, they've been around. Newport's been around for a minute. They also make a kayak outboard motor that is very similar to Torqeedo's kayak outboard motor. It almost looks like a direct clone. So at just under $1,000, at $999, it is definitely the cheapest outboard to get. And it's specifically contingent on running third-party batteries. That is what it's known for. You can buy their own house battery. It's not necessarily a proprietary battery because it can be duplicated, but they can buy their house battery. They do sell a combo kit with a fast charger and a 30 amp hour battery, which in watt hours is about 1,200 watt hours. So it's on the higher side, with E-Propulsion rating at 1,276 watt hours for their proprietary battery. It's also claiming to be a 3 horsepower equivalent. It does that with 1.3 kilowatts, 1,300 watts. And I think as a newcomer coming into this, we're going to give credit to Torqeedo. It's got it had such a unique design that, I mean, E-Propulsion's design in comparison to the Torqeedo isn't terribly unique. Like, there are some unique things. If you look at the motor side by side, they're a little bit unique, but I think E-Propulsion could have done a little bit more in terms of how they made their Spirit look, in terms of originality. I think Elco and Mercury completely, in terms of aesthetics, have real good originality. Those 2 motors, they're original. This motor, though, like, you came in new, you came into the game. Why did you have to, like, knock off the other 2 so definitively? I'm just saying you could have came in and made a statement here, and you did not. I mean, that being said, though, it doesn't look bad. I do like the gray. The gray goes better with different style boats. Like the Mercury and the E-Propulsion, they have this white to them, and it's like a textured satin white. It's actually very hard to clean. You got to have a serious cleaner if you get any sort of smudge on them. This one has a solid gloss gray to it, much easier to clean. The black tiller, it's over harder to get dirtier. So in terms of aesthetics for that, I mean, it's a good point. But there's other things that are just really cheap about it. When we unboxed it, it came in like a cheap box. I don't know what you guys do, but I have a thing called like prejudging. Like when I go to Mexican restaurants, I judge that Mexican restaurant right off their salsa and chips. If the salsa's crap, like I leave and I go to another one. So, I mean, prejudging is kind of important. So if I had to prejudge these just based off personal appearance and quality of the packaging, Newport is losing. E-Propulsion is doing quite well, but like obviously the Avatar over here is winning. Because everything down the line from quality matters. I don't know any company that skimps on quality somewhere just to maximize on quality elsewhere. Like generally quality suffers all the way down the line. You can kind of tell. You could look at the other boxes there and you could just tell based on quality of preparation and packaging what we were possibly getting. It matters. It does matter. The little things matter. Pay attention to your packaging when you get something. Like, think about it. So for connections, it doesn't even have a waterproof connection. It has Anderson connectors, and it's got this cheap spiral loom you can get at the hardware store. Like, maybe it does. But I would say that Torqeedo, Mercury, and definitely E-Propulsion do not have cheap wiring connectors. Those are legit solid waterproof pin connectors. You just had this cheap non-waterproof Anderson connector housed in a rubber booting, but water's going to get in there. I don't know, you'd have to wrap it with tape to make it waterproof. I don't think that's great. And a lot of people are going to run these in the salt. Like, salt water on an electric connection is terrible. Significantly erodes the overall wiring. And once wire starts corroding, it's like a cancer. You can't get rid of it. I almost wanted to cut the connection to see if there was even marine grade wiring ran through there, because that would at least make it a little bit better if it was actual tin copper marine grade. But I didn't even, I mean, it's not like I couldn't have replicated an Anderson connector. I could have done that very easily. It's not like they had like a serious connector. So I almost did it and I didn't. I regret it. Possibly somebody else will do that. So people who are going to target this motor are really planning on running third-party batteries. That is their thing. That's what they want to do. And just know that that's all this motor can do. It does not have a proprietary battery that is either internal or integrated on top of the motor itself to make it a true portable outboard. So it really is just another outboard, and it requires an internal battery somewhere else. So solar power and all that would just be really contingent on the actual batteries you use. Some people really love the fact that it's only a third-party battery. A lot of people who get this motor are against proprietary batteries. But I think that you should at least have an option for a proprietary outboard, or internal battery setup. I just think that that's where the Mercury failed with only having the internal proprietary, but no third party. I think this one fails with having all third party, but no proprietary. Now there's just no excuse where the new motor's coming out. You should just have both. Why not have both? What's the issue? Unless you're just running your motor off such a unique wattage it can't be replicated by third party batteries like Torqeedo, then why aren't you running third party batteries? But also, why aren't you running a nice integrated battery that actually possibly might be the most efficient way to run the outboard? But those things are all here and there. They kind of petty. Those are like personal preferences of mine. I think they do matter. But again, look, it's cheap. People are going to look at that price point and be like, ooh, money. So let's talk about its performance. For the price, how is the actual quality and efficiency and performance of the outboard? Well, when I tested it, it did the worst. It was the most powerful, but again, it's at full throttle, it was the least efficient, which is hilarious. Like, what's the point of having all that power if if it has no range with that power? It's nice to have it, I guess, in the moment where there's some waves and there's some wind and it's pushing your boat and you need that extra thrust. So I guess it gets bragging rights there, but it also had the most terrible range. It had such horrible range that I thought there was something wrong with the motor or the battery. So the Newport Vessels actually came on the video, responded to like everybody who made a comment, and then responded directly to me saying that I did not read their battery system right, that I should have actually read their battery system when the battery is at rest, and that's how you get the actual full readout of the battery. So their digital readout is what it is. I have a full review on this video. I'll link it in the description. But long story short, as I was running this at max throttle, the battery gauge which had 5 bars, it was going down very, very quickly. And then obviously when I backed off, the battery gauge started going up, and when the motor was completely off, then eventually kind of gave me its full battery capacity left. What that means is when the motor is being used, you cannot trust the battery meter. That means you have to go for periods of time and stop for a little bit, because it doesn't happen right away. You have to stop and look at the battery meter and then find out, and then keep going. And that's pretty bad considering the other 3 top outboards don't do that. Like their digital readouts are the digital readouts. So I was giving them the benefit of the doubt that possibly I got a lemon and that we were going to work it out. But they kind of just told me, no, it's just based off what they said, that it wasn't a lemon, is that I just didn't know what I was looking at. So now that I know what I'm looking at, I think even worse about the actual outboard performance. Like I started off at the dock. There's this like peak to a cove about a half mile out. And by the half mile out, we were at like 3 or 2 bars. And that was at rest, 2 to 3 bars. It raised. That was when the motor was completely at rest. And then I was like, this is horrible range for all the thrust. But they claim to be the most like powerful and the most efficient. You might have the most powerful. I mean, it's a 36 volt setup, not a 48 volt setup, but they still generate 1.3 kilowatts of power. So it means they're probably pulling a lot of amps to compensate for the lack of voltage. So the whole thing about more volts, you need less amps. It's math. More volts, less amps. They do that in a lot of things. That's why you would run higher voltage. So Mercury caught onto that. E-Propulsion caught onto that. The good thing about it being a 36 volt setup is at least it's replicable. So third-party battery, you can stack that. You can stack 3 12-volt batteries in series, or you can get one integrated 36-volt lithium battery pack. Given how it ran with its own house battery, and you couldn't even gauge the meter of the battery correctly, you probably would want to get a smart battery. Like, you can save on the motor, but you're going to have to invest in the batteries. So there are really good lithium battery companies out there. I would recommend a lithium battery for this motor with a really good BMS, a very good BMS, because you can't rely on this thing telling you how much battery power is. You're going to have to rely on the BMS. So a battery company with a good BMS inside it, you just look at it on your phone and get the exact verbatim readout of the battery. So you'd have to just trust the BMS of the battery. You can't actually trust the digital layout of the Newport. It's not trustworthy. It's also loud. It was the loudest of the three that I tested, and it made this weird rattling. At full throttle, the whole motor like shakes and rattles and does this weird gurgling thing. And there was no like prop feature, like safety prop feature to save the lower unit or save the prop. There was just nothing. It just powers right through if you hit something. Mercury at least had a split-second dead stop. The way you didn't just keep on hitting whatever you just rolled over. And E-Propulsion had the best like clutch release system. However they did it, I don't really know, but it was the best one. This one had nothing. I don't know if Torqeedo has one. I don't think Elco has one because I don't know how they would even be able to do it, because they run a shaft like an actual gas outboard, so it's highly unlikely they have one. Let's talk about actual performance if we compare all performance across the board, because we've got 3 motors and they all run relatively the same speed, give or take like 0.3 to 0.5 mile an hour. They all generate about 3 horsepower, but they all claim to be better than each other. So let's talk about actual performance between the Newport, the Merc, and the E-Propulsion. When I did a watt test on my boat, I tested, because everybody makes this claim that these are just trolling motors. They don't perform any better than trolling motors. I might as well just buy a trolling motor. Why buy an electric outboard, which is stupid. It's not true. All these, regardless of which one ranks number 1 to number 5, they're all better than trolling motors. So I'm pretty sure at like 20% of their capacity, they'll reach whatever speed your trolling motor will at 100% capacity. They're made to propel, not to troll. So to do that, I tested like the max speed that my trolling motor would get on my boat. So that was 3 miles an hour. So at 3 miles an hour, the Newport, the Spirit, and the Avatar, they all use between 180 and 200 watts. So that's roughly 20% of each of these motors' power. That's what it took for all those motors to reach 3 miles an hour. And then I did the 4 mile an hour test. That was about 80% of my boat's actual speed. So at 4 miles an hour, they all ran between 500 and 600 watts. Around 550 to 580 watts, I would say, was the norm. That was all 3 of them. It was only when you cranked the motor at the high speed that you really could see the difference in power. But that also doesn't terribly matter much. The Newport had the highest speed, but it had the worst range. The Mercury had the second highest speed, almost dead on with the Newport, but it had also like the second worst range. The E-Propulsion had the lowest speed out of the 3 when I tested them, but the E-Propulsion had tremendously longer range. We're not just talking about a little bit longer, tremendously longer than the Newport. The Newport didn't even stand a chance. The Mercury, it wasn't the worst range, but you could noticeably tell, like by the time we reached half battery, it took us a lot longer to reach half battery with the E-Propulsion at full throttle. And so what wins? Because we're talking about max range. You're talking about like 0.3 to 0.5 mile an hour. That's just not a whole lot to justify like a terrible range. I'd rather have a longer range than a max. Than what is 0.3 mile an hour going to do for you? It's not a bragging point. It's not you're like doing 10 miles an hour more or 20 or 30, like where it's that's significantly more miles an hour. It's not there. It's a stupid bragging point. But what's more important is that 20% of your battery to 50% of your battery, which is going to be what most people are going to be running the range on these motors, you didn't perform any better than each other. So Newports, if you are bragging about your 1.3 kilowatt output, and then Mercury is kind of advocating with their title, their 7.5E, with the 750 watt to the prop output, if those things are so prominent, then why at those speed tests were you not able to perform any better than the Spirit? Based on the numbers and based on how you guys marketed it, you should have been able to run slower. So if the Spirit was running at 180 to 200 watts at 3 miles an hour, you guys should have been doing 150 watts or maybe less, 130, 100. Then you really have some measurable, because that's a lot less watts used to achieve the same speed. And at the 4 mile an hour test, you should have been only running like 400 watts, 350 watts or something. And that would have made sense. It doesn't make any sense for all your power to come out when it matters the least. It's a gimmick at that point. It's a gimmick that you can generate that much power because you also generate less range. It's a bad trade-off. I wouldn't take that trade. Nobody with a logical brain will take that trade. So in my opinion, this is how it ranges. The Spirit clearly wins. It pretty much checked the boxes in all categories. So everybody from designing the engine all the way to the marketing and the pricing, clearly there was a win there. Mercury, the proprietary battery thing, along with the price, and then the not any better performance for the price, that kind of knifes you. But even then, you're still a better motor than the other three. So you get number 2, and you're still honestly my favorite motor, but it's only because I'm a fanboy. I loved it, how it looked and how it performed, but it's definitely not the best. I like it for personal reasons, not because it's the best. Torqeedo, I would say that at least it's reliable, and it's got its stuff together. It might not have the voltage together, or the range, or the price together, but at least it's got longevity and running. And so Elco's 5 horsepower, I've seen what Elco can produce, and I just don't think that this is a real legitimate effort from Elco to produce anything that's supposed to compete in this range. It's just not a really good competitor. They need to update their stuff that's super old and archaic. Now, I can't give Elco a definitive number 5 because I've never tried it, but the only reason Newport beats the Elco is because it's a third of the price of the Elco and does the same thing. Like, it runs third-party batteries, and it at least has a digital readout. Might not be the most reliable digital readout, but it's there. And it's also maintenance-free, and it's I guarantee you it's lighter overall than the Elco. So it wins. That's the only reason Newport gets number 4. But in terms of everything it promised, it has the most problems, has the cheapest layout. It's like the second worst motor out of the whole 5. So you're getting what you pay for there. It's less money, but it's definitely less value than the other 3. So think about that. That's my assessment. That's the motor shootout. And I assume that these companies are all very much competing together, and they're going to be producing. Some of these people are very hungry, you can tell. So I'd like to see what Torqeedo and E-Propulsion are going to bring new to the table, because these people are coming out very aggressively with stuff. So I hope their techs on those ends are going to be serious with their new model, and they're going to come out with really serious competitors, because it's really easy for an incumbent to get left behind once it loses momentum. So we'll see. That's my review, guys. Thanks.